Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Mike from MOBOXgraphics.com, and we are back with Microinteraction number 3. So just heads up, if you want to download this project file, you can head over to our Patreon account, patreon.com/MOBOX, where at the $3 level, I believe, tier 2, you can download project files. So let's just go ahead and jump right into After Effects here. This is a pretty simple project, but yeah, so you will learn a couple things, which is why I think these microinteractions are so cool. So I'm just going to create a new background layer, new solid, and I'm going to make it a little bit off-white, just barely off-white. And I'm just going to lock that layer. So in addition, I'm going to create a new rectangle with rounded edges. So I'm just going to select that and make something that kind of looks like a little card. I'm going to center up the anchor point by pressing Y on the keyboard, moving it to the center of the object, which it keeps snapping, which is annoying, and I'm just going to center it up. That color doesn't really work for me, so I'm just going to change the color to white, and I'm going to open up the rectangle properties here, and I'm going to go to the path, and I'm going to increase the roundness, which makes this look a little bit more like a card. So to get it to stand out, I'm also going to add an effect. So under Effects and Presets panel, I'm just going to look for Drop Shadow. I'm just going to drag it onto the card, put the direction directly 180, so you can just type 180. And I am going to increase the softness a lot, decrease the opacity, and increase the distance. So now that kind of looks like a little card floating on a piece of paper. If you're curious, by the way, what these composition settings are, 1600 by 1200, 50 frames per second, and I'm going to change this to just 10 flat. The reason why I have it at this resolution is that Dribble is uploaded at 800 by 600, so this is exactly double the resolution, but I do that because I do like to zoom in a little bit, and if you make it too low a resolution, you'll lose out on that. So I'm just going to scale that up to fit, and let's go ahead and start our project. So I guess first up, I'm going to create 2 more rounded rectangles. And you can't see them because they're white also. I'm just going to turn the fill off, and I'm going to increase the stroke, but the stroke should probably be a different color, huh? So you could actually see it. And I'm just going to make the stroke semi-bold, but not too bold. I think the roundness looks good, but I'm also going to center up the anchor point. Again, press Y on the keyboard. And I think that this is a little too close to the center. So I'm just going to move it over so I can make sure the anchor point lands exactly in the center. I'm just going to bring this back here. And I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate this layer. So now I have 2 buttons created. I think I want these buttons to be more rounded, so I'm just going to open them up here. Go into the contents of each, and I'm going to just increase the roundness until we get full roundness. So they're perfectly round, they're like a little pill. Just like that. And I'm going to add some text here. So I'm going to say daytime. Center up the anchor point again. Control D to duplicate this layer. So I guess I should have probably thought about this, maybe day and night. Make the 2 buttons. And let's see. I think that looks good. I'm just going to start parenting these to each other. So I'm going to parent the day to the day button and the night to the night button. And I'm just going to rename this to day button and night button. I'm going to name this background card. And I'm actually going to lock that background card so I don't accidentally keep grabbing it. Okay. So I'm going to animate those later, but in the meantime, I'm going to do the sun to moon animation up here. So to do that, I'm just going to create an ellipse. If you hold shift, it creates a perfect ellipse, and I could change this later, but I think that looks good. I'm just going to set up the anchor point. From now on, I'm going to use my tool here, It's from Mount MoGraph. It's called Motion 2. You could buy it at mountmograph.com. I think it's like 25 or 35 bucks, but it's super useful. So many great tools. But there are other ones that do similar things for free. So just look online for free plugins. So I'm just going to set up the anchor point using that plugin. And I'm just going to center that up, decrease the stroke, change the fill to yellow. Just like that. And now I'm going to add the sun rays. So I'm going to use the star tool. I'm just going to hold shift again. I'm going to use my tool to set up the anchor point and center that up. And that doesn't look that great, but if that's what you're looking for, actually, you know, I don't want to say it doesn't look great. It's just not what I'm going for. But you could actually open these up and you can adjust these settings here. So you can adjust the interior radius. So I'm going to make the interior radius almost to the end. And I'm actually going to bring the opacity down just by pressing T on the keyboard so I can actually see what I'm working on here. So I think that's about right. I guess the only other thing I will change is the number of points to maybe 6. And I'm going to bring the opacity up again. But I'm going to make the color a little bit more maybe orangey, just barely orange, just barely. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, hit R on the keyboard, and I'm going to rotate it. How much do I need to rotate it? 30 degrees. So now this one, I'm just going to make this even a little bit lighter. So they're just barely off colored. But what I could tell here is that these kind of bump into each other and I don't really like the way that looks. So I'm just going to, I should probably rename these here to beam 1, beam 2, and main object, because that main object is going to also become the moon later on. So you don't want to name it, you know, too specific. So let's open these beams up and see if we can't make this maybe look a little bit better. Whoops. I've got some other work in progress ones here that I just kind of were prototyping, just so you know. So let's see here. A lot of settings in there to jump around with, but we could change this to 5 and see what we get. This will need to rotate. I think 5 might be a little bit more appropriate. Just make sure my rotation is correct. That looks wrong, but just gonna change those all back. I think this has to be -30. Maybe -35. I should probably know this since I'm an engineer. I should probably know the maths, but I'm not good with the maths. So I'm going to open up these polystar paths. What I did there was you could use the search tool and it will open up more of these settings for you, so you don't need to go digging all the time. Let's mess with the inner and outer radius. I'm just going to copy that. Paste it. So I think that looks a little bit better. It doesn't look perfect, but you can always spend as much time as you want. And I think the colors look almost right, except for this might be a little too dark. I think that looks a little bit better. Basically, I want it to look like it's just very barely different. Okay, so I think we can start animating now. I'm just going to turn motion blur on all these layers and enable motion blur because my computer probably is fast enough to do this at this resolution. So I'm going to create I'm actually going to duplicate this main object, Control D, and I am going to move it a little bit. I'm going to change the color to white. And I could do this a number of different ways. I can make this a mask, but for simplicity's sakes, I'm just going to make it white because the background's white. I'll need to mask it out later on, but we'll cover that in a sec. I'm just gonna make it so those beams are disappeared, and I think that moon shape actually looks pretty good. So from here, I want to move the anchor point, so I'm just going to press Y on the keyboard and move this anchor point down by holding Shift and maybe to the left a little bit. So you'll notice here when I rotate this, it rotates out. Now, let's see, maybe if I bring this up a tad, we'll see what that rotation looks like. Or maybe it needs to be on this side. To be honest, I can't remember. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. So we have that done, and now we can start animating these. So obviously I need to animate the rotation of the main object. Main object to, I'm just going to rename this mask, main object mask. It's going to annoy me that there's double space there, so I'm just going to delete that. And while I'm here, I'm going to create a new null object, and I'm just going to marry all of these things to the null. That way I could actually move the null around. Before I do that, I should probably move the null object into the center there, and now marry all these. Okay, so I need this rotation, so I'm going to hit R on the keyboard and set a keyframe for that. And for these beams, I'm going to have a scale keyframe, but I'm also going to open these up, and you could actually animate the outer radius, which I will do. And I'll show you what that does. When you increase and decrease the outer radius, you get something that kind of looks like that. So selecting all of these layers, I'm just going to press U on the keyboard, and it brings up all of my keyframes. So I obviously want the rotation to happen later, so I'm just going to move that down. And I'm going to just rotate that out of the way slightly. Pressing K on the keyboard, I'm going to jump to this point in time, and I'm going to bring these in about the same. So I'm just going to paste that. But I'm also going to reduce the scale just slightly. So that way they're the same. And let's see what our animation looks like. So that looks pretty good, but obviously there's no smoothing. There's no smoothing involved. Are those the exact same color, by the way? Let's see. FFD0000, FD9000. Wait. I'm just going to make this just a tad bit darker, just so it looks like there's at least a little bit of variation there. Okay. So you can totally do this if this is your cup of tea. You could select all these and go easy in. Bring this all the way over. Bring that all the way over, and you'll see what that looks like. And you could do the exact same thing to all of these, which is a pain, but it can be done. What I would do is I would use my tool by Mount MoGraph, because it allows me to do the exact same thing with these sliders. But for this video, I'm going to just use this because I already started, and I know a lot of people don't have it. And so I kind of feel bad. I don't really use the graph editor as much as I probably should. But this is how you use the graph editor. Basically what we're looking at here is, I think, the speed graph, which, what did I do? Let's just back that up, Control Z, which basically determines how fast something happens. So obviously it's happening really fast, and then it slows down. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to get out of that, and let's see what that looks like. I think it's a little slow. I'm just going to drag this in. Okay, so now we're going to add a little bit more effects here. So it's starting out during the day. So I am going to make the night button and the night transparent. So press T on the keyboard, set transparency keyframes. Press K on the keyboard. Actually, these transparency keyframes need to be more down there, I guess. J on the keyboard. I'm going to decrease the opacity to, let's say, 30%, which is pretty light. Maybe even lower. Maybe we can bring this down to 25%. So the mouse is going to come and it's going to hover over this. And it's going to click it. And this is going to, it's going to become dark. And then let's see, then these will press T on the keyboard, press K on the keyboard. These will drop down to 20%. And I'm just going to add some smoothing here to these as well. That smoothing I just added should look very close to the graph, which it does. We would just bring that in even more. So that's basically what this tool does, is it adds the smoothing that I did by hand previously. So it's really slow. This needs to go faster. And I'm going to change the smoothing mode, again using the tool. And I think that adds a little bit more smoothing on each end, so I'll show you what that looks like on the graph editor. It just makes it smooth on both ends, as opposed to being fast and then slowing down. Okay, that looks good. And I also flirted with the idea of layer new adjustment layer. And I'm just going to mess with this. So basically an adjustment layer, anything you put onto an adjustment layer in the settings menu will apply to all of the layers beneath it. So if I go invert here and I drop that on the adjustment layer, you can see that it changes the color of everything. So I've kind of flirted with the idea of using this. Let's just mess around with it. We might not do it in the end. But this background card, if I just duplicate this layer, put it above the adjustment layer, and change the blending mode to, let's see, alpha matte. Basically, it just mattes out only where the card is. So only where this is, I'll show you what I mean by that. Only where this card is, you'll get the adjustment layer. Let's see. What else? I would probably want to add a brightness and contrast onto that adjustment. It's just a little too black and white for me, but I kind of wish it was more of a gray color. And the moon and stuff you could change later. That's not really a problem. So how can I get that to be more gray? Actually, that would be it. If I blend with original, it makes it more gray. So I could just delete that brightness and contrast, blend with original. I'm gonna set to maybe 10%. So also now, let me just see these keyframes, press U on the keyboard so I could see them. I'm going to set the transparency of this to 0. Press K on the keyboard, set it to 100. Just like that. And I'm going to add my smoothing here. So let me just open up all of my effects here. Kind of like when that happened a little bit faster. Just like that. I think I broke something. I don't know what I broke. Just hit Control Z. Okay, I don't know what I broke there. But it broke something when I pressed something. Okay, let's see. That moon is not the color that I want. So let's see if I could change color. See if I could select that blue. And I can. So what change color does is it lets you pick the color that you want to change. But you see that you can still see a little bit of the blue. So let's see. Just increase the tolerance a little bit. It's my only color here, so I'm not really too concerned. So let me just see which color looks the best. Kind of like the idea of like a teal. It's a really good color. I like that. You do get a little bit of color shifting there, but I don't think that looks horrible. So I'm just going to leave that. Okay, now we just need to add our mouse and maybe a couple stars here. So I'm just going to create an ellipse, just like that. Set up the anchor point, Y. And I'm going to center this up to my null object. Let me scale this down slightly. Change the color to white. And look for CC ball action. And this is how I make stars in After Effects. So I increase the scatter, reduce the ball size. And now you just kind of mess with however you want this to look. This is obviously going to need to go beneath the moon. So beneath the main object. So I'm going to need to add a fill to this. I'm just going to search fill. Add it to my, what I'm going to rename as stars. And basically do the opposite of the color, right? Because don't forget it's inverting everything. And for some reason, which I know why, we're not getting any stars there, which is a little bit annoying. Let's see if we can't put the stars on top. That looks goofy. Maybe we could just ignore the stars, just not do any stars, but maybe add like 1 or like 5 or 6 here at the end. Let's do the mouse first. Okay, so I'm gonna add the mouse cursor here. It's important that I delete the background layer. If you want to download this mouse cursor, or you can make it, I made mine in Illustrator. If you want to download this, again, become a Patreon, and it will be included in the download file for this. I'm just going to decrease the mouse size until that looks about right. I'm going to add a drop shadow to it. So I want the drop shadow to be directly straight down, 180. Increase the softness. Increase the distance. So I think that looks realistic. Okay. So now we're ready to start actually animating some things around here. So I'm gonna have my mouse cursor, position, keyframe. I'm gonna have it start down here. And it's gonna move up. To night, and it's gonna click. So I'm gonna let it sit there for a moment, and then I'm gonna move it down here, or somewhere over there. So we can just see what that looks like. Okay, obviously that looks goofy as hell, but that's okay because we're still working on it. So I'm gonna have the mouse move maybe then, and I'm gonna add some smoothing here, which again, I'll show you what this looks like in the graph editor. This is that level of smoothing that we added. So again, you can just replicate that with the Bezier handles. So I think I want this mouse cursor to come down. I think that looks more natural. So remember, the farther the mouse goes, the longer you want this keyframe to be. So it was out there when I had the mouse bouncing up there, but as soon as I moved it to the bottom, I brought that keyframe in. So I think that looks about right. Maybe make this, change the effects a little bit. I'll show you what that's going to look like. Speed that up a little bit. I'll show you what the graphs look like here in a moment. So that looks like a smooth motion that you would expect. Maybe mess around with that one also. That looks too fast, so I'm just going to grab all of these keyframes here because I don't quite have enough time in the beginning. I'm just going to increase that to about just past 2 seconds. I don't think that looks natural, so I'm going to reset these keyframes by using, again, this tool. So now we're back to those square. Just going to select these and try to just do, I think that looks the most natural. And bring that in just a tad. This is all just trial and error, by the way. I'm sure you can tell already. Okay, so that looks good. So the mouse goes there. At this keyframe, by the way, I'm jumping between keyframes with J and K. It's going to click. So I'm going to have another ellipse. Move the anchor point to the center. Just going to press T on the keyboard to bring the transparency down so I know it's going to be right in the center there. And I'm going to rename this to click effect. Put that under the mouse and make the color black. The opacity down. So I'm going to set a scale keyframe and an opacity keyframe. Press U on the keyboard. So I'm just going to move these keyframes over. Press J to bounce back to those other keyframes. Set the transparency to 0 and the scale to 0. or actually the transparencies are flipped. So I'm just going to select these, right click, keyframe assistant, and time reverse keyframes, and basically it just flips the keyframes. Oh, I flipped the wrong ones. I'm an idiot. So I'm gonna flip the opacity keyframes. I think that's a little slow. Just gonna drag these in and add the smoothing. Okay. So I'm gonna make the click effect happen just before, just like that. I think I can drag all of these keyframes over. Holding Alt, I'm just going to stretch these out. When you hold Alt, it stretches all of these out proportionally to one another, which is really good, great effect. Yeah, I think these could even move over a little bit more. Yeah, it just happens really fast. Let's see if we can't adjust this smoothing. I can't tell if it needs to be faster or slower. It's really hard to tell. Or if it needs to happen sooner or happen later. It's all trial and error, really. I think that looks about right. So let me show you what these graphs look like now. Look just like that. And the mouse position cursors look like that. So the mouse is going to sit there for a sec, set a keyframe, and then we're going to go up to the day. I'm not getting any motion blur on this mouse, so let me just make sure motion blur is turned on for everything. Maybe I am getting motion blur and I just can't tell. I am getting motion blur. Okay. So just selecting these, gonna add the smoothing. And it's going to click it again, set a position keyframe, and then at the final, it's going to go back to the start. So I'm just going to select the start, the first keyframe, Control C, Control V to paste that keyframe over. And I'm going to add the smoothing, the same smoothing effect. So I will reverse that effect, but I'm just curious to see what this looks like. So now I can come over here and duplicate that clicking effect, Control D, press U on the keyboard, move it down, and move the position. And also the color. So I'm going to change the color to white now. Which looks good. And now I can select all of these keyframes. And if you do not have this tool, you can't do this, but since I have the tool, I'm just going to hit clone. Now, if you don't have the tool, you can copy and paste each of the keyframes one by one. If you try to select all of these and copy and paste them, it duplicates the layers, which you don't want. So you have to do this one by one. I'm just going to do the rest with the tool. So if I highlight all of these keyframes, right click and go to Keyframe Assistant Time Reverse Keyframes, I'm going to do exactly what I needed to, exactly the same order, right? So it's starting in this dark layer. And as you click, the sun's coming out. However, these need to be moved over just a bit. So this is staggered. So let's see what that looks like. All right, now we just need to add the proper smoothing. Because before I do that, I'll show you what I mean by that. These are directly inverted, which you don't really want, right? So this started fast and it slowed down. This one's starting slow and it's ending fast. So you need to readjust these to how you want them. Now again, if you don't have the tool, what you would need to do is come in here, grab these handles, and reverse them all just like this. Which is a pain in the butt, and it's hard to get them perfect. So I highly recommend using the tool. It was the best investment I have ever made in After Effects. So we just make sure all of these are going to be adjusted and see what this looks like. Perfect. I guess the only thing I would say is that I think it needs to happen just a tad bit faster. I think that looks good. All right, I think we're just about done. The last thing we can do is we could change the fill on these. So that might be more work than it's really worth, but I was gonna make this pill solid when it was clicked, but we're already 38 minutes in and I don't know if that's worth it. The only thing I think I will do though is I will change the opacity here on these layers. So I'm going to change this to maybe 15, maybe even 10. Whoops. JJ. Set these to 10. Ten, 10, 10. Wow, those were actually 25. I messed that up. And just from what I'm seeing here, I'm going to move these keyframes over. I think that looks good. So we go from day to night. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like, subscribe, check out other videos on this channel, as well as the Patreon account where you could download this project file anytime. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching.